On Friday, I made a video where I talked a bit about YouTube's new paid subscription model, and one of you asked, why don't I have a Patreon? And this is simultaneously a very easy and difficult question to answer, so we're going to break it up into two parts. The first part is the question of why am I not using a Patreon right now? What are the hard reasons for that? And this is a fairly easy question to answer. The first reason is that I don't need to. Those of you who may have been watching for a long time may have noticed that the production value of the stuff that I'm putting out is significantly lower. I'm recording this on a relatively cheap camera. I'm not putting in much time into editing, and it takes me approximately an hour to produce, about a half hour of filming and then a half hour of subsequent editing. If we look at kind of the average video editor salary in New York, it's about $65,000 a year, which comes down to about $30 an hour. $30 a video at approximately 5 videos every week means that on the whole I'm investing around $8,000 a year to make this stuff. And I'll be honest, that's something that I can't afford to lose. There are many people who perhaps couldn't, but I don't know if you know this about software development, it is a relatively lucrative field. People are paid a fair wage, and I'm doing okay. So having established that I don't actually need the money to keep doing what I'm doing sustainably, wouldn't it be nice if I could make things and actually recuperate that investment, just break even? Yes, perhaps it would, but the thing about these videos, since I've sort of come back and started doing things regularly again, is that I'm making stuff very frequently, very low quality, and this is very much a temporary thing. This is not sort of a final format that I'm looking to rest on. I'm trying to establish the habit of making videos, and I'm trying to get to a place where I feel healthier, I'm mentally in a better place, and these videos are helping me do that. It's a hobby, and I'm getting stuff out of it. This isn't supposed to be some content that I'm producing for mass consumption. And so my fear is that if I were to actually solicit donations, there would be some sort of expectation that I would, produce a certain amount of stuff, or that the content would be relatively similar to what it is now. And that just may not be the case in a few months. So that's the reason that I'm not using services like Patreon right now. But the second question is a really, really hard one, and it's, will I ever do it in the future? Is it something worth considering? What are my feelings toward it? And I have to say that I really don't like the idea for some reason, and I can't completely rationally defend that feeling. One of the ways that you encourage people to support you via Patreon is by offering, tier rewards or private additional supplemental content that's only available to the subscribers, and that idea really bugs me for two reasons. One, it's fragmenting your audience. They're now going to be viewing things on multiple platforms. There's less of a sense of community. There are two different communities that don't necessarily interact. And the second thing is that you're establishing kind of a class amongst the people who watch your stuff. The people who can and are inclined to pay for things and thus get preferable treatment, and then the plebeians. And speaking at least for myself, I'm not really sure that a lot of the content on YouTube should be considered as more than a hobby. Some people like classic cars and they will throw thousands and thousands of dollars at that. Some people play a lot of Magic the Gathering and there's an awful lot of money that they're not going to recoup that investment. For me, yeah, I've sunk a lot of money. I've sunk probably $8,000 to $10,000 worth of money into YouTube stuff, just kind of camera equipment and lenses and software and music licenses. It's an expensive thing to do if you want to do it the way that you want to do it. The stuff I'm doing now is dirt cheap, but back in the day I wanted to do kind of more complicated stuff. And it was an investment that I decided to make because it was a hobby for me and it was fun. Patreon is really formulated on this idea of patrons, and I think it's sort of assumed that this is universally a good thing, and I'm not really sure that it is. There are plenty of examples, web startups that, get a whole bunch of funding, but then they have this group of investors that get to basically weigh in on all of their business decisions, and it makes it really hard to operate. Or if you look at university research, because it's publicly funded, it comes with a bunch of additional restrictions. Or if you look at, plenty of other things. Imagine what artists in the medieval period would have been able to create if their sole method of funding wasn't generally tied to religious stuff. And that's not to say that any of the work that was produced under patronage ended up being bad. It's merely to acknowledge that what we are seeing in various art forms is a subset based on the people who have kind of veto power over what it is that the artists were able to make at the time. Now, I need to say that this is not meant to imply that I don't trust you, audience. I think we're friends. I think we have a good relationship, but there is a saying that you should never lend a good friend money. Because regardless of how strong the relationship is, when there's that feeling of obligation and debt, it does complicate things. It makes it harder to interact. And I think that even, if you're looking at people who are sponsoring stuff, even if it's split just amongst amongst a broad variety of people who have different opinions, and you could sort of say, well, this one person wants me to do this, but I don't want to do that, so I'm going to ignore them. You've still got a bunch of people who aren't you, who have kind of hold the purse strings to your ability to make stuff. Not to mention the fact that statistically, the people who are going to hold those purse strings are going to skew older, are not going to be a representative sample of the people that you're making stuff for. There are plenty of folks who cannot afford to be a patron of a particular individual, and that's fine and that's great. But the problem then is there's a small subset of your user base that exerts far more control over what you're doing, and you feel a sense of obligation to try and meet their needs first. So what does that actually mean for the future, for me and money? I don't think that I'm going to be quitting my job and looking at YouTube full-time anywhere in the near future, nor do I have any immediate plans to look at something like Patreon, but I don't rule it out. Because ultimately, if it does come down to the point where I have to say, I would love to spend time on this, but I have other things that need to happen, and I need to be able to pay bills and blah, having the incentive there to allow me to make videos for less of a cost would be helpful. And certainly if it meant that I was able to up production value and do really cool things, that'd be great. I mean, right now, the only expense that I really have is paying someone to write something on the whiteboard. But I am really interested to know what you all think on this particular issue, because we've talked on Friday about the idea of revenue dependent and revenue independent creators. There are people who make stuff that has to be paid for, and there are people that make stuff who don't need to be paid. Do you think that these Patreon concerns are valid for both of those groups, or maybe just one? Are you patroning? No. Are you helping support someone right now? How do you feel? Do you end up in a position where you feel like the people that you aren't supporting aren't as responsive to you as they may be to the people that are actively handing them money? I'm interested to know what your perspective is, because I could be completely alone in this. So let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys soon.